Hey there, gunfighters. What do you do when you don't have a gun? When you don't have that option, you don't have that ability? What about when a knife is what you have? That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. The podcast where we talk about guns. Today, knives. Tactics, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Hey guys, before I put in a real rapid-fire version of the bio, if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing if this is not your first rodeo, leaving a review of the show, hitting some stars, whatever your app allows. Blessed to have served in the military, law enforcement, combat veteran, private contractor, competition shooter, lifelong hunter, guide. Blessed by God that He got me through all those things so I could share this firsthand training, knowledge, experience with you to serve you today. Let's dive into the podcast. Hey guys, also on the bio, I don't want to misrepresent myself here. I have some knife fighting training. I've carried a knife in combat. I've carried them on the streets in law enforcement. I have some melee weapons training, which includes knives. I have never, thankfully, been in a fight to the death where my primary weapon was a knife. A knife was like a backup or a backup to a backup. Like a K-bar in the Marine Corps. Or a push dagger on my war belt. So my experience in this is mostly in training. Like force on force kind of training and things like that. Anyway, with that, this came up in the chat earlier this week, and I've talked about a lot of this knife stuff before in different episodes, but hopefully this is going to be in a different way. Because I normally see a knife as a utility tool, and if need be, an emergency get-off-me tool so I can get to my gun. But maybe you don't have a gun. And hopefully not just because you're lazy. Maybe you live somewhere where the magistrates, whatever that is, right, they don't trust you to carry a firearm on your hip. Maybe you are in California, and in the time, even California concealed carry permits are easier to get than they used to be, but still, you may be waiting a long time. So from the time you apply to the time you get it, what do? Maybe a knife is what you have. Maybe, I don't know, you live in Australia, and your government just does not allow you to walk around with a gun on your hip. And there may be many other locations where I don't have to go down the rabbit hole. Maybe it's an age thing, right? I know they just recently changed the law so you don't have to be 21 to buy a handgun. You can be 18. But many places still, because of those old antiquated laws, I think, you might have to be 21 to get a carry permit. So what do you do from age 18 to 21 to carry on you? If you don't live in a location where you're allowed to carry a handgun before then. Well, maybe a knife is your primary. For many reasons, maybe a knife is your primary. So that is what we are going to talk about. Like when a knife is your defensive option. Now, if it's an all-around survival knife, and I've talked about this before, the subtitle of this podcast is Survival Guns, but for survival knives, there's kind of the duality, I think, just like there is with guns, with firearms. I like to be able to put meat on the table and protect myself. With a knife, I like to be able to skin a deer or an elk or a buffalo or anything else. But be able to skin something and be able to use it as a good defensive tool, meaning it has to be big enough to get to vital things, to reach vital things and puncture vital things. I don't want to be graphic here, but knife fighting's a nasty business. So I'm going to say 3 or 4 inch blade is kind of the sweet spot for E.D.C. Certainly longer is better, but are you actually going to carry it? But it needs to be big enough for that. And I should also say I have zero experience other than just playing around with things like karambit style fighting. But from what I've seen in general, it's the stabbing and the thrusting that's effective. Slashing you should learn and study and stuff like that, but nowhere near as effective as thrusting. So it should be an effective thrusting weapon. I don't care if it's a Tonto, right? If it's primarily for defense, it doesn't really matter if it's great for skinning, right? So, but a good thrusting point, I don't care if it's a Tonto or a clip point or a drop point, you can have that fight later. Double-edged daggers with a real fine point are a thing we see over and over and over again in history, throughout history. From the, the Roman Pugio to the Fairbairn knife, to the old Gerber Mark double-edged daggers, right? They're good for that. Now, a lot of places that restrict your ability to have a handgun in the U.S. also restrict your ability to have like a double-edged dagger knife. In some places that I'm aware of in California, unless they change it under 12020, if I remember correctly, is the California Penal Code, it is a felony to have a double-edged dagger concealed on your person. It's a felony, but it's only a misdemeanor to have a loaded handgun on your person. So if you're going to carry a dagger, you might as well carry a loaded handgun and then carry a good, legit, single-edged knife. You're way better off and you're way less in trouble. So just know, knife laws can be as or more convoluted than gun laws. Some places may let you carry a firearm concealed with a concealed carry permit, but you can't carry a knife concealed with a concealed carry permit. So you got to do your due diligence. Don't just think, oh, it's a knife, I can carry it wherever I want, because you probably can't. For instance, California has a lot of restrictions on melee weapons other than just handguns. So know your knife laws, but it needs to be a thrusting implement capable of reaching vital things. And I'm going to say for that, 3 to 4 inches is sufficient. Now let's kind of talk about the order here. I like a fixed blade knife. A fixed blade knife is simpler. Unless you go to the extreme, you get like the cheapest gas station, like fixed blade knife with the cheapest Chinese steel and like the most rugged, robust lockback knife. Because there are some really good, rugged, robust lockback knives. You're probably way less likely to have issues with a fixed blade knife. If you're talking about comparable quality like a D2 1/8 inch blade and a D2 1/8 inch blade, you're probably going to have less issues with a fixed blade knife. It's a simpler tool. It has less moving parts. Even if it has like screw-on scales or something, the knife will work fine without those scales. Those are there for ergonomics, like the handle. Talking about like a full tang fixed blade knife, that's about as simple a tool as you're going to get other than a rock. So, my number one recommendation is going to be carry a fixed blade knife if you can. They're simpler. Also, they're easier to deploy. For years, I carried a fixed blade knife in combat, and then when I went and did law enforcement stuff, I carried a folding knife in my pocket, and then when I started doing more of the training, the rolling around, grappling on the ground, CQB type stuff, I went back to a fixed blade. Because if you're rolling around, somebody has your arm pinned behind your back, your gun hand, or you're shoved over on one side and somebody's beating your head or something, you have to not only get the knife from wherever it is, but you have to get it into action and introduce it into the fight. You may or may not be able to do that quickly with one hand with a folding knife. For the simplicity and the speed at which you can deploy it if you have a decent sheath, a good friction click in modern Kydex sheath with like a tech lock on it that you just put on your belt, that's pretty good. That's pretty fast. And it's pretty simple. You grab and go. You can grab and thrust. You don't have to grab and then defeat some kind of locking mechanism and make sure the knife's locked open so you don't thrust it and then have it fold back on your fingers, of which I have had happen in real life and had to get stitches, and that wasn't fun. Think a knife is locked and it's not, and it folds back on your fingers. That's a bad day. You don't have to worry about that with a fixed blade knife. Again, unless it's the cheapest Chinese gas station fixed blade knife, it's probably not going to break on you if you're using it in this kind of scenario as a knife. Now, if you go trying to pry a lock open with it or open a gate or, use it as a crowbar, which seems to be popular on YouTube for some reason, then it might break, yeah. But if you're using it for this defensive application, if it's a decent quality knife, fixed blade, it's probably not going to break in this application. So for that reason, I advocate you carry a fixed blade knife. It's better all around. Simpler, faster to deploy, less moving parts you got to deal with, less chances for a malfunction, faster. A lot of benefits there. So if you can carry a fixed blade, I'd say carry a fixed blade. Good thrusting blade, 3 to 4 inches minimum. Now, one thing you can probably carry, whether you want to or not, I don't know, but if it's your primary defense, I'm going to tell you what people do on the streets. In Los Angeles, because I was LAPD, they probably do it other places too, but a screwdriver. A screwdriver is a nasty melee weapon. It's kind of like a more brutally wounding ice pick. And no matter where you are legislation-wise, which is why they carried it on the streets, whether they were gangbangers or transient or whatever on the street in LA, they'd carry a big screwdriver. You know why? Because it works. Technically, it's a tool, not a weapon, so you could pretty much carry it anywhere. Except for like maybe even the airport. I don't know. I'm just saying, unless you're going through like a metal detector, you can legally have probably a screwdriver. And a big flathead or Phillips head screwdriver with a really long shank on it, that is a nasty, effective weapon. So, if you have some kind of legislation or whatever, and you can only have a 2-inch non-locking, pocket knife or something, you may consider having one of those as a tool, like a utility tool in your pocket, but you may want to carry something like just a screwdriver. I mean, the criminals are doing it, so probably should be at least as well armed as them. Or they carry guns for that matter. But you get what I'm saying. If you have so much legislation that you can't have an effective fixed blade knife, you may want to consider a screwdriver. What is a screwdriver if not a really nasty thrusting weapon? And when you think about it practically, it makes a lot of sense. That's why a lot of people on the street did it. They're cheap, they're effective, they're strong. Pretty simple. If you're using a screwdriver as a crowbar, you might break it. But if you're using it in this application, it's probably not going to break. It's strong, it's simple, it's no nonsense, it's effective. So, fixed blade, if you can get it, screwdriver may be a consideration. If you can't do a fixed blade, you might want to consider a good, and this is where I would consider you could get a decent quality fixed blade for not a lot of money. If you're going to go this route, an automatic knife, I would spend the money and get a really good one. Maybe several $100s. If you're going to get an automatic. I'm not a big fan of the OTF knives. Again, this is not what I do. I carry a knife as a backup emergency get-off-me defensive option. I usually carry a full-size fighting handgun, at least, if not a rifle, and then a full-size fighting handgun, or a shotgun and a full-size fighting handgun. But if this is your primary, and for some reason you can't carry a fixed blade, but you can carry an automatic, because they're a lot more complex, I would spend the money and get a quality one. Some really nice semi-custom ones, but the two big ones that have been around for years that are kind of like what I would consider the bottom for this are Microtech or a Benchmade Infidel. And they're going to set you back some non-gold standard currency. They're going to set you back a little bit, but probably no more than a defensive fighting handgun. And if you needed to save your life, again, I would recommend a fixed blade, but if not, get a good automatic. Now, those two are out the fronts, meaning they shoot out the front. There's some kind of button on the side, and they shoot out the front. I'm actually not a big fan of those because they're more complex. What I carried for years when I was in my folding knife phase, the Gerber 06 Auto. Now, Gerber makes some really, dirt cheap Walmart knives, and they make some really, really nice high-end knives. The Gerber 06 Auto is one of the higher-end knives. Is S30V steel, which is one of the super steels. It's a good blade steel. It's a really, really good knife as a knife. They make it in a Tonto. They make it in a drop point. They make it in a semi-serrated. They make it in all kinds of options. It's been around a while, and it's still around because it's a good knife. I looked it up. It's a big, heavy, beefy knife. I carried one for years. It's like 7 ounces when I looked it up. To give you an idea, my 357 5-shot 357 Magnum revolver, kind of one of my go-to light carry guns when I'm not carrying the full-size fighting handgun. It weighs 11 ounces. It's not a tiny knife, but it is a big, big, beefy knife. It's an automatic. They also make some aftermarket springs, because I did it to mine. The normal spring works fine. It opens the knife, but they make some that has some real thwack to them where it opens it up real fast and real heavy. It opens and it locks, and it's a beefy lock. I would hate to see what you would have to do to break one of those locks. You can also lock it closed or lock it open. Now, if I was carrying it for defense in my pocket, I wouldn't have it locked closed But if I wanted to use it for some real heavy work because it's what I had, I could lock it open. And again, it's a big, beefy locking knife. So there's some examples of a good automatic. Because again, you can't just have a knife. It doesn't do you any good if you die with a really cool fancy knife in your pocket. That's Damascus steel and the best super steel and space age, blade material with ancient mammoth tooth handle. That's all well and good. I like a beautiful knife, but if you die with it in your pocket because you can't get it out fast enough, you die with a cool knife in your pocket. That's not what I'm trying to set you up for here. You got to get that knife into action quickly. So an automatic, although not as good as a fixed blade, you can grab it and quickly deploy it with one hand. But again, a lot of places may legislate that where they say you can't have an automatic knife. And you got to look up, and don't just go by what somebody said on YouTube or whatever. Look up the statute for yourself. Sometimes you can't have an automatic, or you can have an automatic if it's under a certain length, and you got to weigh the pros and cons. But look up your own penal code that applies to you where you live or where you travel often. So, automatics. If you're going to get an automatic, they're a complex machine. Get a good one. Spend the money. You want to get some cheap gas station automatic to just maybe play with the principle of it and see how it actually works. And if you like it, that's fine. But if you're going to carry one to stop somebody trying to kill you, spend the money and get a good one. Okay, there is another option. If you cannot carry a fixed blade, you're not going to carry a screwdriver, you're not going to carry an automatic knife, there are some other options. The next one you may consider is the Emerson Wave. The Emerson Wave is kind of like a tooth on the back of the knife where you can draw and deploy that knife on open. So when you're drawing it out of your pocket, you can open the knife up. You still gotta train with it just like you would train with a draw, right? You gotta make sure you take your safety off when you're drawing your gun if it has a safety. On this, you gotta make sure that knife locks open. Because again, if you just think it's open and you go to shove it into something and it folds back on your fingers, that's a bad day. Ask me how I know. So you need to train with it. You need to know that it's locked back. I would not consider it as good as an automatic. Although if you are really good, it can be as fast or faster than an automatic. But it introduces that human element into it. You might be able to do it fine when you're just chilling at home in front of a mirror practicing your knife draw. But when you're on your back getting your head beat into the curb and there's another dude laying on top of you and then you try and draw the knife, are you going to be able to do it effectively? But again, the Emerson Wave, probably the best non-automatic option for a folding knife. It's simple. I like simple. It's not automatic. I don't know of anywhere that specifically prohibits an Emerson Wave. So if you can have a locking folding knife of a certain size, you should be able to have one with the Wave. And there are a lot of different knife brands that will use that. Spyderco, some other ones will use that feature. So you may want to look that up and try that out. Again, this is not normally what I do. I don't normally carry a knife as my primary fighting tool. It's a backup, and I do train knife fighting. I try and stay on it pretty regular. It's a perishable skill like anything else. But I carry a fixed blade, and it's not even my primary. But if you're going to train with this, you had better treat it like your life may depend on it. Your other option is all your other menagerie of locking, folding pocket knives, which most people carry. I'm going to say almost a must. Now, if you just find a knife or it is the only knife that you have or something, you need to be able to deploy it one-handed. I'll give you an example. The Buck 110 is a classic, beautiful, iconic knife. It's almost impossible to open one-handed. The Buck 110 Slim is one of my favorite folding knives. Now, I don't generally carry a folding pocket knife day to day for my normal carry setup if I can help it. Sometimes I will carry one as like a backup, super covert thing. But one of the knives that I really like, and this is kind of an all-around good pocket knife for survival, maybe not the best fighting option, but it's a decent fighting blade. The Buck 110 Slim is the modern iteration of the Buck 110. It's got a pocket clip, so you can carry it oriented the same way in your pocket, which is kind of a must for this, right? You don't want to go fishing in your pocket. Sure, you might be able to get into your pocket when you're standing up and your pocket's fairly open. What about when you're in the guard position on the ground getting your head beat in? You need a pocket clip so that knife is oriented in the same way, so when you grab it, you can open it up the same way. You don't have to think about it. It's going to be beat into you with repetition. Buck 110 Slim has that. The Buck 110 Slim also has a thumb stud on the side, so you can open it one-handed. It's not great. It's just not my number one recommendation for a fighting knife, for sure, but it's got a good blade on it for a fighting knife, and you can open it one-handed. Just to say that of all the folding knives, it should be able to be opened one-handed, because your other hand may be broken or shot or pinned behind your back. Who knows? But don't count on being able to have both hands. You might be fighting the dude off with the other hand so you can get to your knife. So that's kind of a big deal. The other one, locking knife. Locking knife. If you live in a location where you can't even carry a locking pocket knife, I would say that's not real safe to begin with. I would not consider a non-locking knife a good defensive tool. I would have it as a cutting tool, and I would be really careful with it if that's all I could have on me, but I would not want it as my primary. You might be better off with something else, like a screwdriver, like a Kubotan if they're legal where you are, like, think outside the box, like a roll of dimes in your pocket. If you can't have a locking knife, you probably can't have brass knuckles or anything like that. You might be able to have a Kubotan or something that functions as a Kubotan, like a decent flashlight, like a good solid metal pen. I would probably take a good solid beefy metal pen over a non-locking pocket knife for defense. I would have both, but I would rather have a good metal pointy pen in my pocket clipped in than a non-locking pocket knife. So think outside the box there. But of all the different mechanisms, I'm not going to get into is the Benchmade system better than the liner lock system, then whatever. Get a good quality, strong, locking knife you can deploy with one hand if you're going to carry a folding pocket knife. And again, that's way down on the continuum of what I would like to have. But if you are, a good locking mechanism that locks, that you can open one-handed, that you can have oriented the same way on you all the time. And we talked about fixed blade, but I should mention the neck knife thing. I did a whole episode on neck knives. I forget if it was on Gunfighter Life or Alpha Male Podcast. It's not generally what I do. I do have a couple. It's kind of my wife's method of carry. It is a decent neck knife, especially when she's running and she actually not just going for a jog around the block. Like my wife runs marathons. So it's better than nothing. She can have a good neck knife on her. A good fixed blade neck knife that you can grab with either hand under your shirt. Now, I don't think it's as good because if you're rolling around on the ground or you get knocked over, that knife may go to some place or other. But it's not a bad option, and it's kind of ambidextrous. So get a decent fixed blade neck knife, dagger, push dagger on a lanyard around your neck. Something like that if you want to do that. Again, it's not my first choice, but I figured I'd throw it out there. Now, how I carry, again, I carry not as a primary defensive option. It's a secondary. I carry on my support side. I generally have a full-size fighting handgun on my strong side. I'm right-handed, right-eye dominant on my right side. I carry my fixed blade knife, most of the time a fixed blade knife, on my support side hip. Or if I'm carrying a folding pocket knife, in my support side pocket, so in my left pocket. I do that so I have a defensive option on both sides. Again, talking about doing the training and the melee fighting and stuff like that and the mixed martial arts. When I'm on the ground and somebody's got one hand pinned or they're on me and they're way 250 pounds and my gun hand is pinned under my gun or my holster and somebody's laying on top of me, I want a defensive option on the other side. Also, if I'm wrestling for my gun, which is a thing that happens, like I'm trying to keep my gun in the holster and somebody else is trying to get my gun out of the holster to take away and shoot me with it, I want a tool on my other side that I can access with my other hand and use that to get their hand off my gun. I like having that option on both sides. I don't want a gun on my right side and a knife on my right side and nothing on my left side. So that's the way that I do it. But again, a knife is not my primary. If a knife was my primary, right now I'd still probably carry it on my left side because when I train and I think knife, I grab left side. If I was limited for a long term with only a knife and now we're right-handed, you may want to switch that around. You may want to consider, just like you would with a handgun, strong side hip on your belt line in a decent holster fixed blade knife or in your strong side pocket, oriented the right way. You can grab it, index it, and quickly deploy it with one hand on your right side. Anyway, those are some thoughts on knife for defense for a primary weapon. I've mentioned things like this before, but if you're going to carry on your belt, you may consider something like a tech lock. That's what I have on my gun holster. That's what I have on my fixed blade knife. They're both on tech locks. They snap onto my belt. I'm a man. I wear shorts or pants that have belt loops that I can actually put a man-sized belt in and clip weapons on. If you want to carry in a pocket and you want to carry a fixed blade knife, there is the ulti-clip with a lot of modern Kydex sheaths. You can clip on an ulti-clip, and it's easier for you to just look up what an ulti-clip is. Starts with a U. You can clip it inside your pocket so that you can just grab and pull the knife out. If you don't want to carry on your belt line, but you want to carry a fixed blade, but you want to do it in your pocket, those work really well. That's actually how I started when I was doing the ground fighting thing, and I realized the fixed blade was better. I did for a long time carry a fixed blade in my pocket because when I was taking on and off a war belt, it was just easier than messing with my primary defensive knife. Just have that one in my pocket, and then I'd have a push dagger in my war belt. Just easier to have again, primarily for me, it's a utility tool. I use a knife as a knife, but I also want it to be a defensive option. Just easier taking on and off my war belt to just have it in my pocket. So those ulti clips work really well if you want to slip a knife in your pocket, but have it oriented and have it stay there and not move around, and have the sheath stay when you grab the knife. Anyway, consider that your tactical tip or tips of the day. You shall not pervert the judgment of your poor in his dispute. Keep yourself far from a false matter. Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not justify the wicked. And you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the discerning and perverts the words of the righteous. Also, you shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. If you are a good, strong man, a protector, you should use that strength to uphold justice, not to take advantage of people, to use force to get what you want, or not to use your power and influence to control people to do something that's not just. You should be using that strength to protect people that are weaker or less prepared, not take advantage of them, not to show partiality. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.